Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlawn Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlawn Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. I'm Alan Miller, as usual, and we have a return guest, a gentleman who actually was our very first sponsor over a decade ago, Bill Raker of U.S. Federal Credit Union, and they've stuck with us.
We sure have, Alan. Thank you for the invitation to come back on your show. It's always a pleasure.
Well, we have things to talk about.
We do.
Let's talk a little bit about you. You are so involved in credit unions and boards of directors and different organizations. Give us a little bit of background on that.
Well, it's been a great career. My involvement with credit unions across the country and specifically here in Minnesota for more than 30 years. It's a real passion for me because I enjoy the work that we do and the mission that we undertake to serve our members as a financial cooperative. And we see a lot of good things happening to the families and the communities that we serve. And I always like the opportunity to talk about our credit union and the benefits of membership in it.
Your credit union, which is the oldest credit union that was chartered in Minnesota back to 1925, is that correct?
1925, we were the first credit union chartered here in Minnesota by an employee at the Minneapolis Post Office to serve the postal employees there. And that gentleman was very active back in the 1920s and 30s. He went across the country chartering 900 more credit unions. But our credit union has grown from serving the postal employees to other federal employees in the state. And today we have a community charter from the federal chartering agency, the National Credit Union Administration, which allows us to serve anyone who lives, works, worships, or goes to school or volunteers in the 7 counties around the Twin Cities.
And when we say U.S. Federal Credit Union, we're not talking about just one office. You have how many now?
Our headquarters are in Burnsville, and we have 9 other retail branches around the Twin Cities.
Got any wholesale branches?
No, but we have great service branches.
And really, really very pleasant employees. Every time I'm there, especially when I bring the dog, we both get treats.
Well, that's what we like to do. We treat our members and their dogs, their pets, with every special care.
So some of these organizations that you're on the board of directors of or leading are?
Well, in the credit union space, there's a national network of credit union branches called the Shared Branching Network that there are over 5,000 credit unions, credit union branches in the country that are networked into this. I'm chair of the board of directors of that organization and have been for several years. And I serve on some national committees with the Credit Union National Association, which is the trade association for credit unions. And in that capacity, I work a lot with the regulator in Washington, D.C., the National Credit Union Administration. Locally, there are some other organizations that I serve on, the Foundation Board for Inver Hills Community College and the board of directors for an organization called Prepare and Prosper, which formerly was known as Accountability Minnesota. One of the things that that organization does is provide free tax filing services for individuals and families who meet the qualifications for the IRS for subsidized tax filing.
And I know, because I'm kind of up on your trips with this service that does airport travel for you called Air Raker.
Yes, very reliable,
That I have
very
a
good service.
close connection with, that you have a lot of different places around the country that you have to go to representing the credit union.
That's true. The role that I fill does require a fair amount of travel to be able to meet on these boards and on the committees that I serve on. And you know, this time of year in Minnesota, it's a great privilege to be able to travel to some other part of the
I would
country
think
just
so.
for a day or two.
I would think so, especially nice warm places
Like
San
Palm
Diego
Springs or
Palm
Phoenix.
Springs.
Yes, well, we have a couple of trips coming up that will take us to those places.
Good,
Yeah.
good for you anyway. That's now, we've done it before when you've been here, but explain the difference between a credit union and a bank, because I know you have all the same services that a bank has.
We pretty much have all of the services that a bank has. There are some very important and fundamental differences between the organization and the governance and ownership of a bank and of a credit union. A credit union is a financial cooperative. It can be chartered in the state that it resides in, like here in Minnesota, under the Minnesota laws, or it can be chartered under the federal laws. The way a cooperative works is that the members of the cooperative are the owners of the cooperative. And so it's essentially a not-for-profit kind of organization where once all of the bills are paid from the operating expense, everything and the reserves are set aside as required by law, everything else is returned to the members in the way of benefits like higher dividends on their savings accounts, perhaps lower interest on loans, and other kinds of services and lower fees. A bank, there are no stockholders other than the members. A bank, on the other hand, is generally organized for the benefit of the stockholders, which may be a few people, or it may be thousands of people who are the shareholders there. And they really do operate for a profit to be returned to their investors. Banks have multiple ways of raising capital. Credit unions, on the other hand, have just one way, and that's through the retained earnings. So those are some of the fundamental differences. Another one that I think is important is that the directors of the credit union are elected by the membership. Every member of the credit union is entitled to one vote, irrespective of the amount of deposits that they have with the credit union. So they don't have shares to vote, they just have a membership status that they can vote. And the directors of credit unions serve without pay. They're volunteers.
As opposed to bank directors.
Bank directors, on the other hand, typically are paid, and the voting of the stock in of the ownership of a bank is like if I own 1,000 shares, I get essentially 1,000 votes.
And it's interesting because going back a few years when Wall Street crashed and we were on the brink of a recession and banks were going down right and left, there were very few credit unions that got into financial problems around the country.
That's true. One of the reasons for that is that credit unions typically shy away from making very questionable loans, and one of the major contributors to the meltdown, the great recession that we went into, were real estate mortgages that were made to people who really couldn't afford to have that type of loan. The lender, typically large banks, would say, you know, you don't need any money down, we'll add interest onto the principal, or you pay interest only on the loan, and as the value of the real estate continues to go up, then it'll be easier for you to repay the loan. As we know, that's not what happened, and so there were significant losses in the financial industry, but credit unions did not make those kinds of loans or hold those kinds of loans. And the credit unions in the country took no TARP money. They took no support from the federal government. They were self-sufficient through the entire process. And credit unions, we're proud to say, have never cost the taxpayer in this country a single dime.
And that's one of the reasons that banks don't like credit unions, but that's also one of the reasons that people should know more about credit unions, in my opinion, in terms of their banking and their banking procedures. Now, one of the big things that's troubling all of us right now, and that's individuals and members and credit unions, is security in this age of IT and electronics and all the things. So let's talk about some of the things that we face as challenges to security.
Well, cybersecurity, Alan, as you pointed out, is a very hot topic and has been for quite some time. It seems like every day in the media, whether it's the newspaper or on TV, we hear about some major organization having their databases, the security of their databases breached and hacked, and information about consumers compromised or stolen. We've had that happen in our market here. Target is an example, Home Depot, Michaels, a number of organizations. In fact, so far this year, there are 644 data breaches that have occurred in this country. And what makes it so serious is that it puts the identity and the credibility of the consumers whose data has been compromised, it puts it at risk. Now, the way this compromise works is some hacker gets into the system of particularly the retailer. Very few financial institutions have had their databases hacked, and that's because the retailers are not held to the same standards of security for credit card and debit card information that the financial institutions are. So let's say that your card gets compromised, and what happens after that? Well, the financial institution that issued the card is notified, and they will take the necessary steps to communicate to the card holder what needs to be done to either close out the account and issue a new card, or to put flags on the account so that it can be monitored. We really encourage all of our members who use our credit cards and debit cards, as any financial institution would, was to monitor the statements on your accounts very carefully to see if there's any suspicious activity on it that you don't recognize, and report that to the card issuing institution immediately. The losses that are sustained in these breaches, and the breach at Home Depot, as an example, has cost credit unions in this country $57 million. Because the compromised retailer, like Target and Home Depot, will tell all of their customers that they will suffer no losses even if their credit card, debit card information is stolen. And that's true, they won't. But it's not because Target or Home Depot will cover those losses. They don't. They are not the ones who are liable under the current law. It's the financial institution that issued the plastic, the credit card or the debit card. So what are the expenses associated with a breach like that?
Well, in Target's case, there are millions of people who had their cards then breached or hacked.
Yes.
And you're saying that Target didn't stand for the issues of the credit cards?
Target didn't lose anything because of the compromise of the cards.
Other than public relations.
The public relations was a huge hit to them. To be specific, we had over 10,000 of our members who had their credit card or their debit card in that Target compromise. The credit union had to bear the expense of communicating to all of those members that their cards had been compromised. We had the expense of closing all of the accounts and issuing replacement cards. And if there were any fraudulent activities on those cards, the credit union was liable for them. So that's the way the system works. That's the way it is today. There are efforts around to hold the merchant or whatever organization that had their databases breached more responsible for the losses that the cardholder or the issuing financial
it
institution.
was Target's negligence. It wasn't the credit union's negligence or the credit card company's negligence. It was something that Target failed to do in protecting their website.
That's correct. That's the way those breaches occur, and that's what I was saying earlier, is that the merchants aren't held to the same standards for protecting that data that financial institutions are.
Now, I have a U.S. federal credit card, and I was hacked a couple of years ago. I was one of the lucky ones. The hacker got in and saw how little money I had. He deposited $100 in my account, and that was really nice. But I don't think that's the general system.
Well, cybersecurity is a very serious issue, and we believe that if you're a consumer that hasn't had a credit card or debit card compromised, that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, because the hackers are more active today than they've ever been, and
mostly from overseas, I think.
mostly from outside of the United States. But that's what the internet allows people to do, to be basically any place on the planet and to get into the system, the network, into any other country that they can get access to. There is some new technology, however, emerging in the financial world, and if I could, I'd like to talk a little bit about that. That is intended to help mitigate the losses in any database compromises. And that's the EMV chip, or EMV stands for EuroPay MasterCard Visa. And the technology it's 20 years old.
And there we have.
And then there we have a couple of cards to illustrate what the face of the card looks like. The bottom card is what a typical debit card or credit card from a financial institution. It's a standard card. It's been around for decades, and it's most prevalent in use today. The top card, if you'll notice, on the upper left corner, there's a little design up there. That's the EMV chip. It's basically like a little computer. And the use of these two cards differs significantly. As I've said, this technology's been around for 20 years. 99% of the cards in use in Europe use the chip card. 85% of the cards in Canada use the chip card. 75% of the cards in Asia use them. In the United States, we hardly have touched the tip of the iceberg.
However, last year, when I was going on a vacation to Paris, what I did, because I knew that a lot of the financial organizations or even restaurants insist on having the card with the chip, I had several of my cards here changed from the standard card to the chip card.
Right, because the standard card isn't typically accepted as readily in other parts of the world. Could we bring the cards back up again? Because I want to talk about the difference in the use of these cards from the perspective of the consumer who has the card and the merchants that's using it. Financial institutions are starting to issue the chip card basically in mass. By the end of this year, by the end of next year, practically all of the cards out there will have the chip on them. Now, they work differently. We're all familiar with the bottom card. It's got a mag stripe on the back of it. When you use it, you simply swipe the card through the reader, and the transaction is initiated and it's off and running. If it's a debit card and you use a PIN, you key in your PIN. If it's a credit card, you use a signature, or you can use a signature on a PIN card in some cases. The top card works differently. It takes a different terminal to read the chip card, and you don't swipe it at all. When the transaction, you're ready to pay for the transaction, the card needs to be inserted into the reader and left inside the reader until the message comes back saying the transaction is complete, and at that point you can withdraw the card.
And those readers are really handheld in many instances, like in restaurants and places like that in Europe, where they just
Yes.
stand at your table, insert your card, and wait till they get the clearance.
Yes. Well, implementing the readers is one of the big challenges, one of the big hurdles here in this country, because every merchant that accepts these cards is going to have to get new technology, new equipment to do it. And it isn't inexpensive for our credit union to upgrade our ATMs to be able to read the chip cards. It's an upgrade investment of $8,000. I'm sorry, $8,000 for each machine to upgrade it. Think about when you go to a service station to fill up the gas tank on your vehicle. The readers on those pumps today only read the mag stripe. They're going to have to be upgraded to read the chip card. It's estimated that it costs $20,000 per pump to upgrade each one of them to a chip reader. That's why there's been such a reluctance in this country to adopt that technology, because of the expense of putting these new readers into all of the merchants that use the cards.
So why is Europe so far ahead of us on this?
Well, there may be several reasons for that, but one of them is that here in the United States, when credit cards and debit cards were first coming into existence or into usage, that we had a typically very fast and very secure network over which those transactions could ride, and it worked very effectively and relatively inexpensive. That kind of network did not exist in Europe. So when this technology for the chip card was put into play in Europe, they were very quick to adapt that. There's an analogy in the phone system. We have a lot of landlines in this country, and that's why it took a long time for cell phones to develop and to catch on, while in other parts of the world where the landlines hadn't been constructed yet, cell phones took off like wildfire. And 99% of the people carry cell phones, landlines don't even exist. So it's a difference of the kinds of technology that existed in the economies at the time that these particular services came into play.
Now, how can people protect themselves? What's the best thing you can do to prevent, say, being hacked? And if you are hacked, what do you do?
Well, typically it's not the individual that gets hacked, although I can tell you a story about how that can happen. It's usually the merchant that has been compromised. There isn't anything the consumer can do to prevent that from happening, because you don't have control over the database of
Unless
the consumer.
somebody steals your information.
If someone steals my card, or if they get my account number, my PIN number, and my identity, they can go use the card that way. But that means that I personally have had my identity compromised, and that's a little bit different than having a database breached at a consumer or some other at a retailer or some other institution. But on the personal side, there are a number of things that people can do and should do. I've mentioned one already, and that is to pay particular attention to the statements that you receive on your debit card and credit card accounts. Be sure to have on your computer a very secure password, and a secure password these days is at least 8 characters long. It's a combination of lowercase, uppercase, and special symbols like plus signs, dollar signs, and things like that. Have a very strong password and change it frequently. Sometimes merchants, when you're using your credit card or debit card, will ask you for your zip code. The consumer is under no obligation to provide zip code. We recommend you do not do it. The merchant simply wants that so that they can target their marketing. It has nothing to do with security. Sometimes the merchant may even ask for a telephone number. We say do not give your telephone number to anyone in a financial transaction. That isn't necessary and it isn't required. Some of the other things that you could do is make sure that when you're using your credit card or debit card at an ATM or a fuel pump, as an example, be careful to see if there's anything unusual about the slot where you insert the card, because sometimes the bad guys, the crooks, will insert a little reader over that slot, and as you put your card in, it will capture the number on your card, and they'll be able to duplicate the number and use your card.
Seems like they're always one step ahead of us.
Well, they usually are. Now, that's one of the reasons that the chip card is much more secure. The chip card doesn't eliminate fraud altogether, because there's still the opportunity of using a credit card and or a debit card, like in an online purchase, as an example, where the transaction is designated as card not present, and so there's no way to read the chip when you do something like that. That kind of potential fraud still exists with the Stripe card. With the chip card, it's impossible to do that. The chip card keeps track of the transactions that I personally process with the card, and if someone tries to duplicate the card, the counter, the transaction counter in that chip, will not sync up with the number of transactions that I have on it when someone else is trying to use a duplicate card, because their transaction count will be different, and the system will say these don't sync up, and they kill it. They kill the transaction. One of the newer technologies coming into play is Apple Pay. And that uses a little bit different technology, where the consumer loads their credit card or debit card into their iPhone. It has to be an i6 phone. And Apple Pay does not use the credit card or debit card number. It uses something called tokenization. And that tokenization means that there is a special, unique sequence number generated every time that card is used. And right now, it's impossible to duplicate that. So that makes that transaction quite a bit more secure than just swiping a MagStripe card.
Always an education when you come in to talk to us, and actually you've been here about once a year now, and as I look at the monitor, I see that we're down to the last minute. So
there's a lot more to talk about.
we
We'll have
have
to do
much-
part two.
yeah, well, we will have to have you come back and literally do part two. And there was much I wanted to talk about civic and community activities that credit unions get into, and particularly U.S. Federal is involved in so many. Excuse me, not just sponsoring as our initial sponsor, Access to Democracy.
We'd love to come talk about those.
So let's do that again in a couple of months. And we've been talking with Bill Raker, who's the president and CEO of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which is really not one location. It's 10 locations around the Twin Cities here. And we have been talking about things that are practical and hopefully are very helpful to you as consumers to protect yourself and your credit. And Bill, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks, Alan.